First of all, hear a little bit about our panellists. James, although you're known now for being an investor, you did start small. Do you remember those days?
I did. I started in a broom cupboard, actually, in Pall Mall, so a tiny office which unfortunately didn't have any windows, and it really was just me and the yellow pages. And I spent my early years just smiling and dialing, looking for customers. So I really do empathise with how small businesses start out and just sometimes how tough it can really be.
Now, James, we heard there from these two panellists and from yourself that sales is key. How do you learn to get good at sales?
Sales, clearly a very, very key issue for any business. And I think that's one of the reasons when I think somebody is looking to start their business, I think that is a question that people need to ask themselves. That, yes, I'm ambitious and I'm motivated and I want to be my own boss, but how am I going to win customers? Because the minute you talk about sales, you also have to remember there is an element of rejection, and not everybody is kind of ready that in the world of business, for every 10 people you speak to, 9 of them are not interested. And I think a lot of businesses, fail or stop trading because people just aren't doing that. And ultimately, I suppose we're all different. And I think when I started, I had no choice. I had to make it work because I had to live and I had to eat. And sometimes, even when you're doing things that are uncomfortable, but you have to be driven because your own personal needs. And, I think like all these things, if you're driven, if you're motivated, but I suppose above all, if you really believe in that product, if like you're really passionate and you're selling that to somebody and it comes across as something that you really think is going to make a difference to that customer, that opportunity.
How should I start my first business, with or without leaving my day job?
I think it's quite common that people research their business idea while still in employment and, exploring should I, shouldn't I, is it going to work, etc. But the one thing I would say is that running your own business and being an entrepreneur is not a part-time activity. There are very few examples that I've come across where people are doing it half-heartedly and become really successful. And I also think it's unfair to your existing employer. It would be great to have your first order. I think that's a bit ambitious because getting an order implies the service is oven ready, the product exists, the business plan's written, the funding's in place. Getting an order, there's a fair amount of work to do, I'm sure in your case, before you got that first order. I think that at the point when you feel ready, that you've got enough information that convinces you that you can make this work. And that could be the business plan, it could be talking to customers in the market. So I think everybody's different and every business is slightly different, but ultimately I think you in your mind generally know when that time is right for you to make that first step. The banks are not in the equity business. When a bank lends money, it's a different proposition to what you go to somebody like me, who's really a private equity investor. Because I'm always going to take a much greater risk and therefore I would expect a much greater return. I think banks are looking at debt, which is a different type of concept. And I think when a lot of people out there saying, I can't get money from the banks, the truth of the matter is, it's not you can't get money, but what you're looking for isn't what they do. And I think it's a definition issue rather than are they open or are they not open. I think when I'm looking at a situation, because a startup fundamentally, is a high risk because it's got no customers, it's got no balance sheet, it's got no security. And let's be honest, when you look at the number of businesses who fail at the startup stage, it's very high. And therefore, for every one I'm going to do, how many am I going to lose money on? And therefore, in practical senses, when you lend money or put money into a business, I would say if I'm going to do 10 deals, probably a third of them are going to fail. So what I need to make on the other 2/3 has to compensate for the ones that I'm going to lose money on. And therefore, I think private equity by nature is more expensive. I think for me, when I'm looking for that entrepreneur, the thing that's probably the most important thing for me is proof of concept. If somebody can demonstrate to me that their product or their service works and that genuinely there are customers who will buy it, and I think as Peter said, with sensible assumptions, typically the banks will want to see some equity participation. I don't think even they would be looking at a deal where they're taking all the risk. So I think a good deal is where it's blended. Bit of entrepreneur, bit of the bank, and maybe some risk of equity. Just listening to you, it wasn't just the bank, it wasn't just the bank guarantee scheme or the loan guarantee scheme, but actually there are regional funds, regional opportunities, government, so it sounds like to me that you've really have got a kind of a rainbow of opportunities, and I'm sure a lot of people watching this show probably don't explore all of those avenues. Sometimes we just go to family and friends, or just go to the bank, or just go to the VC. When you go to the bank and you've got, some sort of private equity firm or Nesta, the bank thinks, well, actually that's interesting because they like it too, the bank likes it, and then because the bank and the fund likes it, an investor comes in and it becomes kind of self-perpetuating. And I think the reason why you probably did quite well is because you did have that blend, because I would look at it in exactly the same way, because I get comfort by other people showing interest in you and believing in the idea. So I think there's a really good lesson there that says, explore all of the avenues rather than just one or two.
James, where would you recommend going for advice these days?
I think the internet is a phenomenal tool, I really do. I think in any one of the businesses I'm involved with, I'm constantly amazed at what is available on the net in every way, shape or form. There are entrepreneur forum groups, there are entrepreneurs that blog, there are government organisations. If you're looking to buy a business, some of the accounting firms, have some fantastic people in terms of what you should do when buying that business, because due diligence, one of the biggest mistakes I made in business was where I bought a sandwich chain, a national company, quite a big brand, and I bought a business and lost an absolute fortune because I didn't do my due diligence. And when you're buying a business, it's not as simple as it looks. It's not just about the fact it's got amazing turnover or it makes a lot of profit. There is a huge amount of detail in terms of governance, legislation, taxation, pensions, etc., that you really need to understand when buying a business. And nowadays, some of the accounting firms, I use them all the time. I would never buy a business without going to a proper accounting firm and getting proper due diligence.
Tell us what other tips you've got for marketing, selling your business on a small budget.
I think it's a great question, and I think one of the things that's very different today that exists now that didn't exist when I started a business is the whole impact of social media. And there are so many businesses that I know that have done amazingly well in promoting their product or their service using very clever techniques. So I think marketing is clearly a must for every business, but it's not any one thing. In any business that I'm involved with, I never say that what you have to do is call customers. I never say you have to do mail shots. I never say it's social media. I never say go out and visit your customers. I always say it's all of the above. In every business, you have to do all of it, because no one single method necessarily achieves that sales target. So you've got to be able to apply whatever techniques that are relevant for your particular business. But right now, I would say, if you've got a limited budget, just look at social media, but be creative with it.
What top 3 tips would you give to gain a competitive advantage? James, let's turn to you first on this one.
I think firstly, knowing your competition, I think it's got to be a must. I'm not sure that every entrepreneur I know really understands the market they're in as well as they should. So lesson number 1 is, how well do you really know the competition? I think secondly, I think business today, in the economic environment, pricing is really, really sensitive. So before you go out there, how well do you really know as to what the options for that customer are when it comes to pricing? Have you really got your pricing absolutely spot on? Because sometimes people's formula of pricing is not scientific. It's because they benchmark it on something, oh, he sells it for X, so I'll sell it for Y. I'm not sure that's really right. You need to go back, what does it really cost me? What margin am I really happy with? And sometimes in the beginning, to gain market share, to win customers, you have to be maybe more competitive than the next one. I also think it's not just monetary pricing. Where's the value add? I think the kind of key buzzword in business today is very much value add. I think in your particular example, I think you're in a very unique position because you've got what we call disruptive technology, where you've brought something out into the market that's disrupting what already exists, because I'm pretty sure at the top of my head that you can't produce a model of something in solid for 500 quid. Just the labour cost without technology is just not possible. So a lot of it depends on what it is that you've got and how you're pricing that. But to be competitive, to make sure, to me, whenever I talk to people I work with, what I generally find is before you can be competitive, you need to know the competition and understand that competition as well as you possibly can, but also knowing how do you really differentiate, because one of the biggest frustrations for me is most of the businesses that I tend to see nowadays are what I call Me Too businesses. And unless there's something compelling, unless there's something unique, unless you've got something that's going to get somebody excited, it's not a business. And the risk attached to that is significantly greater. And I think Amanda's sounds like to me there's a key USP. And even though we've just heard it in a space of minutes, but I get it. And I think the other factor is if you've got a business that you need an hour to explain to somebody, it's not going to work. You've got to be able to put that proposition across either on a one-pager, or in a 3-minute conversation. If it takes you longer than 3 minutes, it's not going to work.
How did you come up with unique business ideas? And this is the last one of the day. So where do these ideas come from? Which is, I guess, what people ask writers, and writers just, I don't know. Is it the same for entrepreneurs?
I think what happens is whenever somebody's come up with something unique, I think it's generally driven by either an event or a problem that they themselves have experienced, where they've always done something in a particular way and it doesn't really work, and they think, you know what, why hasn't somebody invented, or why hasn't somebody come up with an idea to do that? So I think it's generally where you've experienced it yourself. I think to try and sit there and just miraculously invent something out of the air, I mean, put it this way, in 30 years of business, I've never invented anything. I think for me, the smarter way of business actually is not necessarily coming up with something that unique. It's not coming up with Me Too, but you can do something that already exists, but you can do it better, you can do it faster, and you can do it cheaper. So if you take, for the sake of argument, EasyJet, there's nothing new in the concept. We all use planes, we fly, etc. But he did it quicker, faster, because no agents, online, and variable pricing. And, today, probably £1 billion worth of sales. So I personally tend to go for, because when you've got something unique, one of the downsides of being completely unique is you have to educate the market. And educating the market is very expensive and takes a long time. Because the problem is, 9 out of 10 times, I didn't even know the solution exists. Therefore, the cost of educating the market, too expensive. If you've got a product, for the sake of argument, an EasyJet, which is an existing service done differently, more creatively, cheaper, etc., you don't have to educate the market. And it's viral, because if it works, it takes off very quickly. So sometimes I think if you're sitting there thinking, I can't think of something to come up with, I wouldn't necessarily try and invent something new, but what is it that you can do that already exists that you can do better, faster and cheaper, may be the solution you're looking for.